Welcome. Today we're covering the foundation of successful genealogical research, defining research questions and serving what's already known. Uh, Continuing from my first lecture, uh, from my previous presentation video, we're defining research questions and serving what's known. Steps 1 to 2 in the 5-step research cycle. I'm Andre Bagley, and I'm an accredited genealogist in the region of Sweden, but my experience goes to the U.S. and British Isles and other parts of Scandinavia as well, and a bit of Canadian as well. I have about a decade of research experience, 8 years professionally, and this has all taught me this. How you start determines your success more than any other factor when you are approaching genealogical research. So you may ask why I'm combining steps 1 and 2 into one lecture instead of treating them separately. Well, it's because they're deeply intertwined. They're hard to separate concisely and neatly. We can talk about them separately, but talking about one without the other, I find very challenging. Well, let's see why. So the research paradox. So here's my paradox. You need knowledge to ask good questions, but you need questions to guide and drive forward the research process. Whether in genealogy or academics, it sounds circular. Yeah, it is. This is genealogical reality, especially when starting out or when a client or a party for which you're doing research for or on behalf of provides limited information. Professionals know that many clients rarely provide perfect starting points. They might say, I want to know more about my family tree, or my grandmother said we came from Sweden. You work with what exists. Now, obviously, we're going to need more of a starting point, and I'll ask for more information and dig deeper so I have somewhere to dig, because I couldn't even begin to research with just that. I had to learn about that person and a bit about their parents and grandparents, what they know. But anyways, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Genealogy is not linear. It's secular, if I'm pronouncing that correct. You must sometimes research to discover what questions to even begin to ask, or what hasn't been asked before, what would be truly new information to uncover. You have to start broad, dig, and then refine based on findings. This is normal. Professional grade research doesn't mean having everything perfect before starting. Reality is unfortunately much messier, but it's also more interesting. So here's two common starting scenarios. Let's see. So I have the absolute beginner. You start at ground zero. Nobody's done anything before. You haven't done anything before. You may have just talked to somebody who in your family who knows something about your family history, maybe vaguely, and you're curious and you really want to dig more. Or maybe you just got inspired by something you read on the internet and you want to take your next steps. Nobody's done anything before ever. Or you might just you might not even have that close connection to any of your family. But the first thing you need to do is start with yourself. Go through your box of important papers, one that would have your birth certificate and other documents. If you're older, you might have the documents of parents and other individuals that they've passed, that you've obtained, and you have in your personal possession, home records. You can usually then, this is nice if you have established connections with your families. your parents, if they're still alive, grandparents, if they're still alive, aunts and uncles, cousins, etc. And the big thing is you should try to find your family historian in the group. Every family group probably has the person, and usually it's an elder, but not always. There's always the person that you ask, like, hey, who has all the genealogy or the family history in the family? Who's the expert? Because there's usually one person. Not everybody has one, but there's usually the authority that knows stuff, has stuff from prior generations. So those are the ones that keep those stories coming, have the documents. It's usually has the photo boxes of old photographs. Those kind of people are really important to talk to because they may have done some of the work for you. So once you gathered personal archives, you found your family Bibles, really useful, particularly in the U.S. Particularly old ones before they started keeping track of things on registering births and deaths and stuff and things like that. In some places, even marriages weren't recorded until like the 20th century, but in federal government archived records, old family letters, correspondence, certificates, photographs, military papers, probates, etc. Deeds. We'll discuss their value shortly. So, a lot of my experience as a professional genealogist, usually I don't have a whole lot of documents. Usually, all they have is maybe they may have put together a family tree online, kind of gotten started. They have some starting information that they can give me, like I give them a packet of information to fill out. They fill it out to the best of their ability, and that's where we start. And often I don't even get to look at a lot of the documents that they say that they have. It's like it'd be nice to see them, but I don't always get the copies of them. They might not be able to or know how to send them to me. And yeah, and they have a deadline. So anyways, there are time constraints, client budgets. They're already the elder of the family. There's nobody from a prior generation. They're it pretty much. So there's no aunts, grandparents, uncles to really gather stuff. Anyways, so usually you take what's available, and if a subject, if your subject started like living in the 20th century, usually I need just one solid information point, and you can find a record online and build a skeleton tree pretty quickly with public census records and other miscellaneous documents that are just available and easy to search, obituaries, etc. Then you can verify the connections and correct the errors. And as long as the client understands that, in my experience, that's fine. But that's just my experience speaking as a professional. Both approaches are valid. You need to understand your situation and adapt. So there's quite a bit of value in personal archives, and obtaining documents from your family. There's many of these documents contain information that you won't find anywhere else, or would be very hard to obtain. Could save you a good deal of money having to go obtain documents or pay for agents to go and obtain them for you if they even exist. There's some things that are just so private, like a lot of church records are can almost fall into the category of private records with how narrow of scope. Like a certificate written out by a minister might be the only copy in existence. There might not be another record like it. Family Bibles, like they are the they're very important when you get further back, early 1800s, 1700s. Having those can can be a major saving grace in establishing when people are born. They might be the only place where a precise date for birth or death might be even recorded, because there wasn't government interest in recording those events. If you're in a place like Pennsylvania or South Carolina, there's a chunk of history where the state didn't record marriages, and having a certificate or another document indicating when somebody got married and when, where, is invaluable. It might be the only place that there's anything about the documents that you don't have. That you might not have. There might not be anything physical left. Their church records are church and military personal records can be really valuable, particularly for immigrant ancestors. I once attended a class where an instructor was researching her Italian ancestry, and they did a lot of digging, and they had to chase a lot of leads and do an exhaustive area search. They finally narrowed down on somebody particular, and they were certain about that they had found the right person. And then somebody, an older relative that they had already talked to, says, "Oh yeah, we happen to have this old military duty book that from this person. It's like, would that help you out?" And it ended up confirming that they've identified the right place of origin for their immigrant ancestor. But it would have saved a lot of time had they had that. You never know. A lot of people don't have those documents, particularly if the immigrant lived several generations back. Those might have been lost. But if you happen to have those, they're very valuable and they're worth preserving. So why does it matter? Provenance and credibility. Physical artifacts owned by an ancestor, held in their hands, names in their handwriting, you know where that information came from. These create compelling foundations. You can state that you possess a moving certificate from the old country. They're very common in Sweden, that they would always issue moving certificates that sometimes got taken across the sea, with the idea that they would present it to a Swedish Lutheran congregation. Whether or not they ever did, that's another fact matter. But usually they tell you precisely where they were born, where they were moving from, and their birth dates. And sometimes you have the whole family there. Not always. Sometimes in later periods, they had individual forms for each individual they would fill out. You never know. Moving certificates. If you got one of those, that's gold. You don't have to even worry about whether or not you're researching the right person that happens to have the exact same birth date. That's about as solid as it gets. That's why when you find an online compiled genealogy where it says an immigrant came from somewhere, this is a big problem, particularly when you go back in colonial America to the Germans that came to like Pennsylvania and those areas, the colonies, and people will just tack in. They'll find a record that seems to fit their profile and just roll with it, but there's no proof that that's the right individual. It's really frustrating, actually. I find it really irresponsible. Like, what's your proof that this guy and that guy in the old country are the same person? Well, that's the previous. I mentioned this in the previous lecture I gave. Let's see. So if it's your own family, I would definitely take the time to build up your personal archive, comb the archives of your other family, and get that as beefy as possible before digging. You might even want to consider, as you go further back in time, looking for cousins you've never met, seeing if they have anything. Really not, because you never know. They might have they might have some interesting documents, and you can work on preserving those. Scan them, preserve them, put them online so they can be shared and not be lost to time. Like so many other documents, most people that were created by many individuals have been over the years. It's worth the investment. So this is an optional step, but if you're really serious about doing deep dives into your family history, um, getting your elders tested is really important. There's some people I have worked with. Some people that in my community I've worked with personally as a favor, as a good neighbor. I've told them about DNA, and they've it's like test the furthest back generations you can. Because why? Autosomal DNA, the DNA that everybody has, um, all the chromosomes that don't determine gender, it's consumer tests with like DNA, uh, Ancestry DNA, MyHeritage, those platforms, they they go down exponentially every generation removed. It goes down gets halved every generation away from the common ancestor you are. So the more generations, the closer generations you are, the more material you have. Like like if I have my grandfather tested, let's see, I only have 25% of the DNA that my grandfather has, just of him. But if any of his ancestors, those numbers, the percentages really start to become important. And once those segments that shared amount becomes too small, it becomes indetectable, and you can't separate it from the background noise. The common segments, these teeny tiny segments that everybody from a general population might share, like say come from Europe or whatnot. Let's see. So, anyways, it's really important to get tested and to do it so while they're alive. It's just a lot simpler. There are options out there. There's some companies out there that do that specialize in extracting DNA from artifacts, but it's more expensive, and you won't be able to drop that information that testing that extracted DNA sequence data into Ancestry where you have to test into it. You'll be able to plug it into other websites that host DNA match information, but you won't get Ancestry, and they have the biggest pool out there, so you're missing out on quite the pool. So anyways, I won't deep dive that into today. There's Y-DNA, it's the male determining chromosome that's passed from father to son, mitochondrial, passed from daughter to from mother to child, just mother to mother to mother to mother to child, mother to child. You can, it's one of the earliest forms that was really used, but it's very limited in its application. Well, I guess again that's something to talk about later. Don't regret asking. Ask now and try to encourage people to get to do their testing. Now, if you're aware, if you're aware and you are thinking that you probably are going to use DNA, which you probably will or should use anyways, it does support a traditional pedigree documentary research significantly in many factors. You can either verify your connections are right or help you find direction of where to go next, where clues have become too sparse and you've run out of good leads, which happens to the best of everybody at some point. All right, so 6. So let's see, the critical question, what do I know how do I know this is solid? Critical questions beginners often miss is, how do I know my foundation is solid? Um, I always advocate for drilling down to solid bedrock and building from there as far as information reliability is concerned. If you haven't vetted the source uh, of information in which the research question is based, the research question will not help you. You're starting in the wrong place. I believe that was from Paul Graham in a class that I took. Consider this. As you start researching on incorrect information, particularly if you say you found it on an online tree or some published random hobbyist website with no sources, no matter how good your research question is, you'll end up wrong, going down the wrong path. It's a very common trap to find a tree online with your ancestors' names, parents, plausible looking dates and places. You copy it, and you build research questions from it. Then you spend months doing extensive research. You find out that was wrong, and now you have to start over from the correct point of view. I've had to do this recently with one of my client projects where I was told to try to extend a tree. I started extending the tree. I made excellent progress. It was a difficult brick wall, but I was also given the instructions to update their tree on this platform. And as I was attaching documents, I look at each document, and this was something it wasn't a critical document. At least I didn't think it was. It happened. Yeah. Anyways, the problem was that I was focusing on what would have been an individual's grandparents, and I hadn't been given the authorization to check the foundations beforehand. And that's one of those things I do discourage, but the customer's always right if they're insistent on you just working on their end of line. I found that there was a critical, there was a family group where this person's a grandchild should have been born in, and they weren't present. It was a household examination record in Sweden, and that led, doing further digging, it turned out it turns out that person didn't even belong in that family group, and all that was invalid. That whole session was invalid. They weren't mad at me because I did what I told them to, and they were happy that it got caught. And I was like, yeah, first, will you allow me to start from the immigrant ancestor and build out and check the linkages to these end of lines before we put more effort into it? And they agreed, and everything's going great now. But there's a process, and as I was told once in high school by a teacher I really admire, if you skip steps, you tend to end up falling down the stairs. And yeah, there you go. All right. So vetting in practice. Let's see. So what's the basis of your foundation? Is it a published work? That doesn't mean it's proven. It's because it's in a book or on a website doesn't make it true. You gotta ask yourself where the author get their information. Did they cite their sources? Can you verify those sources? Is it self-published, or was it released by a really reputable organization where there was an editorial board and it would have had to have been extensively reviewed? It's basic scholarship. Second, distinguishing certain from questionable information, certain proven with primary sources, ideally questionable if there's not, everything else, family stories, legends, unsourced trees, assumptions. So address the questionable information before you conducting research. So either fix it, shore it up, or back up to the point where you know for sure it's solid. See, note what foundation records don't say. Beginners will make a mistake. Say the certificate, a death certificate for an ancestor just says that they were born in Sweden, but they assume that they might know where in Sweden they come from, or just assume that what somebody's written down without sources has attributed. The certificate didn't give a specific parish. You can't just say that just because a general piece of information was confirmed. That doesn't mean all the specific points were confirmed as well. We naturally fill in gaps with assumptions. It's important to resist that urge. We have to work with actual knowledge, not assumptions. Never assume, and being very aware of what we don't know. Socrates was said of himself to be the wisest man in Athens because he was aware of because he knew that what he didn't, because he didn't pretend to know beyond what he knew, for sure. Because of one of his great complaints of his fellows, the people that assumed they were expert at one thing, they were therefore knowledgeable about everything else. There's a number of fallacies. It's a very simplified version of Socrates, but his ideas about the nature of knowledge is interesting. There's whole lectures and dissertations on the subject, so I won't try to extrapolate on that further or expound. All right. So what makes for a good research question? So you have a vetted knowledge base that appears reasonably solid. You're in solid ground. You're ready to formulate a research question. Not just any question, a good one. There are 4 core principles that makes a research question effective. First, it's never generic. Research the Smith family is not a research question. It's neither is find out about my Scandinavian ancestors or English ancestors. Too broad, too vague, no direction. How do you know that you've answered that question? You can't. It's too open-ended, right? Let's see. Second, requires multiple sources. A good research question can be answered definitively by just one record. If one document could answer your question conclusively without the need to look anywhere else, it's probably too simple. Such as, how did my grandfather die? And you can find a death certificate and it states the cause of death. Well, that was a one-stop shop. It's a part of a broader question about their identity. It might be very specific. Maybe that's all you want to know, but it's not. You can't build a whole project based off of that. The GPS, the Genealogical Proof Standard, requires reasonably exhaustive research, multiple sources, correlated evidence. I guess you could expand that if you could find other documents, primary source documents, like get medical records, but at that point, it's not really genealogy at that point. You're looking for medical history, which is a part of what people do with genealogy, but it's a side quest. That might involve genealogy to prove that you've identified the right people in and that they're your family, so that their medical information is thus relevant to you. Here's an example. Let's see. What is John Smith's birthday? Might seem like a simple, like a research question, but But if there's only one John Smith in the area, you find his birth record, you're done. That's record lookup, not a research question. That's true. That's exactly what it is. You're doing a lookup. Third, it starts with defined identity. Your question must be about one specific person. It's not just John Smith, but a John Smith who married Mary Jones in a particular area and time and place, with enough identifying information that there's no question which John Smith you're looking for. Without a defined identity, you could easily research the wrong person entirely, and worse, not even realize it. How do you know you found the right John Smith? Fourth, it needs to be researchable, obvious but necessary. Sources must possibly exist to answer it. Let's see. What did my ancestors think about moving to America? What were their thoughts? You probably can't answer that unless they wrote letters or kept a diary. It's not really researchable in a traditional sense. I mean, your research might consist of talking to all your family that you can find, see if anybody kept one of those documents. It's technically some degree of research, but it's not a traditional research question that you could hire an average genealogist for and be able to search traditional repositories and find. So there's two types of research questions: questions about an identity and kinship. So these are the core of a true genealogy problem or question. Identity questions establish facts about one person. Yes, I understand that a research question and research objective, they're different. I get it. I can talk about that later. There is a difference between the two. So identity questions establish facts about one person. When were they born? What was their occupation? Did they serve in the military? Where did they die? What religion did they associate with? Etc. Kinship questions address relationships. Who were this person's parents? Who were their children? Etc. Who were their relatives? So one thing that's important, that's critical, is you have to establish identity before you can establish kinship, because you have to know who exactly somebody is before you can determine who they're related to or who they associated with. Otherwise, you might easily connect wrong people whose common intersection is that they interacted with people with the same names, but whether or not they're the same people or not is another question. Identities are really a core factor. All right. So there's four essential components to forming a well-formed research question. First, it has to involve a specific person. So it definitely bears repeating. You have to say, if you're looking for a John Smith, it's John Smith who married Mary Johnson in 1820 in Orange County, North Carolina, and appearing in the 1830 census in that county. This is just a hypothetical example. If you look it up and you don't find somebody that matches that criteria, it's because it was made up. Let's see, a specific person. Now, can we research them alone? There could have been dozens of John Smiths in that time and place. How would you know which one was the one you were looking for? Component 2, specific question. What exactly are you trying to find? Looking for birth date, birthplace, parents' names, identities, marriage locations. Precision is really important in a well-formed research question, although it can also be a vice if it's too specific, but more on that later. Let's see. So broader questions do give you some flexibility, like who were John Smith's parents. Was John Smith's father named James Smith? First question allows discovering whatever the answer is. Second assumes you already know part of the answer, which might be correct, and once you have proven or disproven that, so you have a hypothesis based off of some prior research. That's probably something to put in the background and formulate. I say that's hypothesized. Now we're looking for additional information, etc. But that's a whole other can of beans. Component 3, time frame consideration. You have to understand the eras, what sources exist. Was it something in the early 1800s? You're probably not going to have a birth certificate, particularly if you're like in the American South, the frontier areas. You might have to go and might have to look for other things like church records, family Bible records, land records, probate, etc. to try, and you might not be able to answer the question like when were they exactly born. You might not get a birth date in exact place. The best you might be able to do is just identify who they were related to, and you might just have ranges of possible years they could have been born based off the evidence captured in historical records. The only thing you're being sure of is that somebody was the child of somebody if you're lucky. Time period and tells you what sources to seek. And there's resources out there, like the Family Search Wiki and other resources, resource guides that have been put together by various societies and individuals and organizations that can help you figure out what exists when records start and strategy. Component 4, geographic limitations. Place is really important. It constrains research, and you'll direct your strategy. So, if somebody's in New York record keeping is different than another part of the country. Is it across the ocean? Say it's in Sweden, for instance. Different records, different archives. Things are kept in different languages. Geography will also eliminate other candidates too. Well, if your John Smith was definitely in Virginia in 1840, then John Smiths that were living in Ohio at the same time, or some other part of the country, you can eliminate those. You don't even have to even consider them. These 4 components together produces a solid research question. It's narrow. It's narrow enough to know that so you know what you're looking for, and you could just ideally you could take that question by itself. This has been the ultimate test. Hand it to somebody who has no prior background about what you've done or anybody else has done, and research it. That's how you know as a professional you have a good research question. That's the ideal. Because that's whether or not you succeeded on it, it's really obvious. You got what you needed, everything in a box pretty much, and you can start from scratch, completely unbiased, and just start digging. All right, so there's a pro tip. Definition of successful for a session. I learned this from Paul Graham at SLIG, the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy, and some various courses I've taken with them some years back. It's about thinking about the end in mind, particularly when you need to go write the report, which is the end of the cycle of having a GPS, obtaining genealogical proof. You'll have to eventually write a report. And how you word your objectives at the beginning can determine whether or not you consider the project successful at the end. And success is important, particularly to a professional genealogist like me, because I want to see my clients. I like to end my projects knowing that I've succeeded in helping my client achieve what they're looking for. I want to feel like that it was a success. I didn't waste their money. That we got that the results happened. It was meaningful and worthwhile. So I guess one thing you can do is use flexible language. Words like attempt, assess, investigate, evaluate give you some flexibility. You can say you're going to attempt to identify the parents of John Smith. It's more than achievable than identify the parents of John Smith. Both involve the same research, but one acknowledges you might not find a conclusive answer, and that's okay. Some people, you might not be able to find the answer, but you can always say that you definitely attempted to, and that you investigated it, and that you evaluated, the various options to try to obtain that. And that means you can say, yeah, I was successful. I definitely gave a professional quality attempt, solid crack at it. So, multiple pathways help success as well. Not limiting ourselves to just one record type or one means. It's like you can prove parents through finding a particular record, church vital, census. If you can prove it with a combination, because sometimes you might take multiple sources of indirect evidence from a bunch of different places to narrow down on it. Any of these paths forward demonstrate progress. Don't lock yourself into just one rigid path where it's either there or it isn't, and if it isn't, you're doomed. Like an example, you could say your goal could be to identify relatives or likely relatives of that particular John Smith you're looking for. If you don't definitively prove all those relationships in that particular session, because many sessions are time bound, and the clock runs out, and you're done, you write up the report, present your findings, which you probably should do, make them time bound anyways, but that's a topic for later. Keeps it manageable if you work in chunks of time. Allows you to document things in your progress and prevent thoughts from getting lost, etc. Anyways, it also allows you to help you frame your outcomes positively. Professional reports, typically you'll see whether you have to state, usually while you're in the conclusion section of a report, I've often seen professionals use that space to write about whether or not that objective was achieved. Talk about, rehash and summarize complications encountered, success markers, progress made. They're basically as a professional, you have to justify the bill you're about to hand over. I should be within what was authorized at the beginning, but the question is, was it worth it? You want to make it feel like it was worth it. You want to make sure your client understands the value of what it was that what they paid for, especially if you didn't quite get to achieve exactly what they were hoping for, or if it wasn't as much as was initially anticipated. Granted, a good professional, in my opinion, sets expectations realistically, so that way, at the end of the day, nobody's upset when a project doesn't turn out as wonderful or doesn't produce generations upon generations of extensions. Why didn't you get back to Mayflower? Or I believe I have a slave in my lineage. Why didn't you find them? There's sometimes you just can't get back that far immediately in one project. But that's why specific objectives are important. It makes it easier to define whether or not you've achieved success. How do you know if you crossed the finish line unless the finish line's well defined? Yes. So, and that's more likely to end up, and if a project that's felt to be successful is more likely to result in reorders. And in my world, a client that reorders is is the best case scenario, because there's a bunch of, from a business standpoint, it ends up it's more profitable to build from recurring clients. You can repeat clients, make for more consistent income, etc. I mean, that's just from a professional working for hire. It's just in your best interest. Also, could be in your interest as a hobbyist to make sure that you feel emotionally satisfied with your work, so you feel like you can continue, and that your time is justified in expending and working. It's not about lowering your standards. You're just still being thorough, methodical. You're just wording your objectives strategically so you can document success and progress, even when you don't find that smoking gun document that you might hope for. All right. This lecture is, I guess I'm a little long-winded here. I'm still only halfway through the presentation. Try to be a little more concise. All right, so slide. Let's see, good versus bad research questions. We've talked about this. Just kind of rehashing it. And just a nice slide to look at. And we've talked about everything here. Overall, good questions are specific, focus on one person, clearly answerable through systemic research. Bad questions are vague, bad/poor, potentially involve multiple people. You might not, it doesn't give clear direction, or provide a benchmark of when you've succeeded at that. And there's a lot of researchers that do deliberately keep the objective broad, so to keep their options. Like, say, extend some so and so's pedigree. You don't say specifically, but again, that is actually a definition right there. Did you extend the pedigree? If you manage to do that, even in one part of the tree, one generation back, you succeeded. But of course, that you don't specify which line of a particular person one works on. You're left to the discretion of a researcher that you might be hiring, or an individual. That's more like a professional problem. As an individual, you probably don't want to think in those terms. You want to pick a very specific person to work on and do that one at a time. That's best practice. All right, the literature survey. Has somebody already answered this? This is one thing I always worry about. And unfortunately, my little circle in the corner covered a part of the quote. That was my bad. So I guess what's my quote? Walking the same path that others walked. Learn from their work, especially in colonial era and earlier time periods. It's more likely somebody might have actually researched it already. Colonial founding families are often well researched. Mayflower descendants, many of them had a lot of their genealogies, their descendants traced forward. But recent Eastern European immigrants, probably not so much. There's not usually a whole lot of published research for a lot of people. A lot of Scandinavian immigrants don't have a whole lot either. Some do, but most don't. It's important to do a literature survey. That might mean looking up Google searches and searching catalogs of strategic library networks. Can tell you what might be out there. That's another subject for later. You can save a lot of time if you find. Yeah, so anyways, I probably should go ahead and just step you through, not get ahead of myself here. So before you start searching census, church records, land records, literature survey. That also includes online trees too. I'm not saying copy what somebody found. You've got to remember to vet. Published work does not mean it's proven work, but somebody's has researched from the family. You can learn from their work, see the sources they've consulted, conclusions reached, and gaps you've noticed. Like there was a published genealogy about it was pretty well done. It was about these. It was a little locality specific, the island of Gotland in Sweden, the Baltic. And anyways, it was great. Except I noticed, that it was a really scholarly work, but there was a works cited thing about what they consulted. They didn't consult, Montel's tax records, which in Sweden that's a really important record type, and that gave me a really powerful angle to attack research for this client's ancestors, who I did find some of them in the book, but I was able to learn more about their family because the Montel's tax records named additional individuals that apparently were not identified by this prior researcher because they hadn't looked there. There's reasons why. It was a book published in the 80s. I guess because they hadn't, that it was a different, there was, all the records they looked at were in one repository. This would have been in a different repository. So I understand. But the point is, you need to understand the gaps, and that's what gives and helps you plan. Those gaps allow you to plan research that's likely to be groundbreaking and give you new information that nobody else has put together and published before. So in the first, I would search your institutional catalogs and archives. Many libraries, historical societies, and archives have compiled genealogies. From histories, research notes, there's many manuscript collections, but that's really getting deep in there. Like, for example, you have the New York, not the New York, well, there's a New York Society, but there's a New England Historical Genealogy Society. Their quarterly is very prestigious. They have enormous collections. There's the Family History Library, also known as the Family Search Library. They have millions of items. You can search for anything that they've cataloged, mentioning your family surname, geographic area, in a particular geographic area. You might find some very useful gems. There's also authoritative guides, published guides out there, which I've talked about before. They tell you what records for individual places, counties have survived, where they're held. AI can help with some of this, but remember, I guess this is probably a note about artificial intelligence. It can only dig as far as as its tools can crawl, and their tools aren't welcome everywhere, nor can they go everywhere. So their training data is finite, and so is their ability to crawl through stuff. There's quite a few catalog search functions that you're just going to have to visit and look at the search results yourself to have a full picture. Then you'll look for published articles, genealogy journals, society publications, specialized periodicals. I did mention the NGSQ, the National Genealogical Society Quarterly, the New England Historical and Genealogical Register. Those are excellent places. If your family ever is mentioned in any of those publications, which there are some search engines out there that can help you search through the back issues and then obtain copies through various means. I had to pay for it, but it's well worth it. Whatever it's in them, they don't just publish just anybody's work. They usually have a thorough vetting process. Like NGSQ, for example, they have like a dual blind review process. It's brutal. Like, it's good stuff. And if it ends up becoming wrong, it's because there was information that came up that nobody could have foreseen when it was published. DNA has done quite a bit of work. They now insist on DNA with recent publications. And also, I guess fourth, I mentioned check online trees, compile genealogies, book-length family genealogies. Some have citations, not everybody. Others are terrible, but even a poor genealogy can give you leads of where to look. In fact, there's whole client there's many people I've worked with where it's like sometimes a valid search strategy is finding online trees and proving and disproving connections people have made as a path forward. Once you've disproven everybody else's trees, then it's like, great, well, all these people were wrong, so we have to go find the truth. Or maybe one of them was right, and you were able to establish them with documents. The point is, you established it. All right. So it's nearly an hour long. And okay, so there's the cycle. Just in case you need a visual. Planned and targeted research we're just about there. But you really need what's going on over here in these first two steps to be able to do step 3 effectively. So why does it keep repeating? It's simple, practical reality. Sometimes you have to do research just to know what questions to ask, what questions need asking or have already been answered by somebody else. And yeah, anyways, initial research sometimes reveals new questions. You set out to find John Smith's parents. You discover John had a brother for sure that was named William Smith. You find a document to find out that somebody's already found a will where John mentions his brother. And it's like, well, who's William? Where was he born? Did they share the same parents? Or there's some assumptions you can make based off the surname, but those are assumptions. You could answer, yeah. So, but those questions can help you answer your original question about John's parents, because now you found out about William Smith. So that's flexibility is really important. So the foundation often needs reevaluation as you learn more. Maybe you heard from family legends that John Smith was born in Virginia, but you were starting to do research in other records later. I'm not taking to 3 and stage 4. That he was probably more likely born in North Carolina. You might have to go back. Was the story wrong? Did the family move back and forth? Did they move from Virginia to North Carolina with John born during that move? What's the scenario? There's a lot of interesting cases out there where people had interesting birth situations, places that were named after other places that get commonly confused and muddles the lore. Sub-questions. Let's see. Main questions might be identifying parents, but to answer that, you have to ask a bunch of sub-questions. Where did the parents live before they got married? Or the occupations? Who were their neighbors and associates? Each has a mini question that feeds into your main question. And each answer generates new research directions. Once you identify John Smith's parents, you want to know naturally about their parents. You want to find out where John was born. You want to know about their siblings. Other siblings that they've had. That's why I say genealogy is iterative. Consistently cycling between defining questions, surveying what's known, doing research, then refining questions based off of learning. But good research, this is all guided by a good research question that lets you know when you've crossed the finish line of when you've achieved success, so that you can stop, compile what you've done, and write it up and check off all the boxes necessary to achieve genealogical proof, which includes putting everything in writing. Because if it's not in writing, it's not genealogical proof yet. Data, spreadsheets, documents mean nothing by themselves. It's only when they're correlated and you have them written out and spelled out in a paper that you say that you've proven something. All right. Professional realities. Now we're at the 1 hour mark. This is the part where most people are probably going, when will this guy stop talking? But I got it. I get it. Nobody likes a long lecture. I get it. So basically, there's professional realities. Client work makes time considerations important. Usually, there's like one or 2 hour analysis period. Taking 90 minutes to 2 hours or so. It's important. Sometimes you have to seek the answers that they already what they already know, figure out what they haven't seen or haven't connected dots. You want to try to figure out. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. You have to balance thoroughness against client budgets. You cannot always wait for personal archives. Client mentions an elderly aunt, might have old documents. Great, ask them to reach out. To reach out for that, you might want to make sure that you define. As a professional, you should always make sure. I always have a clause in my contracts of, if you sign off on this, don't sign off on this, or work won't begin until you've gathered your documents that you've told me about that you're going to get. I won't begin until that point. Barreling ahead, rarely a good idea, particularly if you know the client already has some documents already. The patience, I promise, will be worth it, although it's easier said than done if you are needing to make a payment on something, and the money from that project would be very helpful. But that's a different issue. Yeah, so different from tract research in your own family, where you can take all the time needed pursuing every relevant possible lead. Client work, it's a very cost benefits analysis. Which options are the least risky? Which research paths are most likely to get you to the answer or achieve that objective? So you can say this was a successful project. Yeah. Never reinvent the wheel when someone in the family already has it stored away. Exactly. Nobody likes to have you present a nice, beautiful paper and say, we already had all those documents, or we already knew that. Now, however, you can argue that what you brought to the table was analysis, but if it was about a family they were already really sure about, that might not be the best idea. But just know, yeah, that's academically defensible. An unhappy client's not going to reorder, so something to chew on. Let's see. Save brain power for methodology, not memory. Don't remember where you filed something or what you researched. Your file organization will do that for you. Always think with your brain, but remember with your pen. In our case, remember with your file system, your research calendars, record dictation of what you're looking at. That's more pro tip later down the road during the research process. So basically, bring it all together. Setting up for success. Good research questions come from solid foundations. Solid foundations come from careful vetting. Together, these create focused, efficient research. You rush through steps 1 through 2. You don't properly vet your foundation. You don't formulate clear questions. Everything's going to suffer. you waste time researching the wrong person, you follow dead-end leads, or leads that you might, had you paid a little bit more attention, you wouldn't have even started on in the first place. You backtrack, you start over. Investing, you pay for it one way or the other. So you invest time up front, you get getting the steps right, your remaining research time becomes smoother. You know exactly what you're looking for. You're able to make your plans efficiently. You're able to evaluate what sources are going to be relevant, and you're going to know when you've answered your question. So, just the next steps. With these questions defined, your foundation vetted, you're ready for step 3, planning targeted research. So in our next lecture, we'll be identifying specific sources. You can talk about identifying specific sources, answering your question, locating these sources, creating plans, which we've talked a bit about, but we'll do so in more depth. But that planning only works with the groundwork you lay, as mentioned in today's lecture. Guiding principles for all research. Never research without a specific research question that's researchable and requires more than one source to answer correctly. Follow that principle. Always start with a solid, well-defined question based off of vetted information. You do better than 90% of average hobbyists out there that just throw these profiles of their ancestors at Ancestry and other websites' general searches and see what they randomly pick up or happens to show up as relevant documents. Thank you. Next session will focus on planning your research answering these carefully formulated questions. And I invite you to ask me any questions. Oh, bumped the mouse, and now we're in sources. So everything I taught today comes from established genealogical methods and professional training. There's the classics board for certification genealogists, our Genealogy Standards publication. I'd recommend reading the second edition. It talks about DNA too. There's Tom Jones, Thomas W. Jones, PhD, Master Genealogical Proof, really important book. Elizabeth Shawn Mills. I don't know if that's spelled right. Evans Explained, it's a really important edition. Critical work. It's on its 4th edition. Then there's Genealogical Proof Standard, Building a Case. It's a good book to read too. There's also other publications that I've read as well. Look at my bookshelf. There's also, there's a number of educational programs and institutes I can recommend. Personally, I've interacted with the Institution of Genealogy and Historical Research is really good. They have excellent resources. I've attended the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy. I've actually attended their week-long classes. They're very in depth, and you learn quite a bit in them. And the ICAP Gen accreditation process, it's you get through that like I have. You walk out. You have to demonstrate that you can operate from professional standards. They have a program and lots of resources for people interested in that. I draw a lot of my recommendations and my knowledge base from. So anyways, if you've managed to watch to this point, not fallen asleep or clicked away, let's see. So I have a company called Find My Family Genealogy. Websites at www.myfamilygen.com. Here's my credentials and what I offer. I also do more than just Swedish. I also do U.S. and British Isles. I'm doing some projects in Scotland. I've done work in Wales. Lots of work, quite a bit of work in England, going back clear to in some cases back to the 16th century. So I've had associations with a number of accredited professionals from that area. So I believe I'm relatively competent, and I'd love to tackle any research problems that you might have. You might be interested, if you're watching this, you probably want to do this yourself, but chances are you might know a neighbor, a friend that might be interested in my services, and I would be really thankful if you referred me to them. There might be a discount in order for you as well. Um, I'm I'm offering a 10% referral bonus, uh, 10% off your next project if you refer to somebody to me and they place a project order. I'd be more than happy to yeah, that's a simple thank you for directing business towards me. This is a business where a lot of my leads, they don't come through advertising, they come from word of mouth. People seeing me, a presentation, people have worked with me and done projects, recommending me to their friends and family. That's where most of my work ends up coming from. All right, and here's some further reading. Um, giving you some, I guess I've given you some. These are some things to look at. There's lots of books out there, and this is just scratching the surface. Uh, there's a whole lecture you can easily give on further education and learning more. Not to mention you have Roots Tech, which there's a lot of the online presentations are on there from recent years. It's quite comprehensive, combined with the Family Search Research Wiki, and they used to have a learning center. There's a lot that you can learn from them, and I would highly recommend digging that if you want to help yourself. There's resources like this, other presentations on YouTube, etc. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. Hope to see you later.